is White Centipede Noise Podcast. I'm Oscar Brummel, and today my guest is Eric Stonefelt of the organic industrial noise project HUM of the Druid, also known for his esoteric visual art and his involvement in underground black metal. All right, Eric, welcome to White Centipede Noise Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Good to have you here. This is probably the first time I've done a cross time zone interview, and that you were at midnight there, late night, and I'm early morning here. So I've always suggested this to people, but no one's been hardcore enough to want to do it. But that's how we're doing it with you.
How do you do it otherwise?
Usually people early. I mean, it's hard with West Coast because you're on the West Coast, so it's like usually mornings their time and evenings my time.
Gotcha.
Which gets not as flexible. If it's someone, I mean, I don't speak to that many people in Europe actually. So it's usually but if it's the East Coast, it's 6 hours, and we can do 11 o'clock in the morning their time, and then 5 or 6 my time, and it's pretty mellow. But yeah, West Coast is always you got to start at 8 or something like that, 8 in the morning. And
midnight's better. I'm more talkative at midnight than I am at 8.
Good. Well, we're here to talk about the things that you do, and specifically starting with HUM of the Druid, which is your shall we say noise project, though I would say it's more than that. One thing I think is interesting with the project, it was really active in the kind of mid 2000s, around that time when a lot of that really heavy textual, dense, harsh noise was kind of taking the stage and blooming. You were operating in those circles and labels, and had a very conducive sound, but kind of always set yourself apart a little bit aesthetically and sound wise, and oftentimes use the term industrial to describe your work rather than harsh noise. And I don't know if that came from you or if that came from labels or external people describing HUM of the Druid. But what does that term industrial mean to you? And is that something accurate that you feel describes the project?
Yeah. I always, for the heavier stuff that I've done, I've always liked industrial noise. I don't identify with harsh noise. I don't know, because to me, harsh noise, it's that, blistering. You got to turn the stereo dial down a little bit. I've never, even though some of my stuff can be very loud and heavy, I've never really thought of it as harsh. It's had a more dynamic range to it. And I don't know, when I say industrial, it's more literal. It's sounds that actually sound, machine-like, or, are reminiscent of industry. Not just a field recording of a factory, but reminiscent of that at the very least. Of course, it's not just that. There's very organic sort of, almost natural sounds in there as well. But for whatever reason, I just gravitated toward that. And it really came from other people. Okay. Other people referred to it as industrial noise, and it's as good as any, as good of a term as any.
Yeah. Are there ideological connotations to that term for you that you identify with?
Ideological how?
I don't know. I mean, industrial, some people that can just mean dance beats or, goth, raver stuff, but it can also mean kind of an attitude or a kind of maybe the content of the noise, or the music, things can be described as industrial that don't necessarily sound at all similar, but they have a certain ideological focus or approach. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe a little bit, maybe a certain mentality. I mean, HUM of the Druid, certainly not political, certainly not ideologically driven. But yeah, I can kind of see what you're getting at. And, I would say I do identify to some degree with that tradition. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I would say not really though overall.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's a bit like the term. I mean, I guess I am curious in terms of relation to the term black and black metal. What does black metal mean? Right. Which, you have some involvement in black metal I'd like to talk about at some point.
Sure.
But that's sort of like a similar term that can be very widely interpreted, and for some people means very specific things, or some people it's just a type of sound, like, so that's, I'm always curious about when people use the term industrial, like what is industrial culture, for example, what is industrial mentality, what is industrial art? I mean, not just it sounds like it came from like a, an oil drum or something like that, but like
Right.
that kind of the
I
philosophical
think
implications.
Yeah, I think those things kind of take on a life of their own. They kind of become self-defining in a way. Um, with industrial in particular, like I never had any interest in, industrial rock or industrial electronic music, the beats, the dancing. No issue with it, but just never had an interest in that. To be honest, before I got into noise, I wasn't even aware that there was a different interpretation, or that term had really been in use going back to the 80s to refer to what we now might refer to as noise or experimental artists. But
Yeah.
once I got deeper into it, I do like a lot of the older industrial noise, and it just kind of fit the direction the sound was taking.
The second edition of the Initial Shock Fest will take place on July 6, 2024 in Montreal, featuring Richard Ramirez, The Nausea, Heat Signature, Slime Street, Flat Grey, Skin, Parasite Nurse, Ethros, Deep Grey, Death Glaze, Murmur, Foul, Praxillus Succubus, Come and See, and Splinter Assembly. Advance tickets are available now at initialshock.screaminride.com. An Aftershock matinee will take place the following afternoon, featuring Thin Mountain, Molena, Aaron Altomare, Green Mist, and John Vaughn. Follow Initial Shock MTL on Instagram for regular fest updates, including artist bios and more. Initial Shock is presented by Screamin' Writhe and Disaster Sources, sponsored by Factor, Pizza Bouquet, and Untitled Zine. Now available from Reanimated Miscarriage, cult 80s and 90s noisecore reissues, and discography compilations from Gorbage, Minch, Pissed Off Orgasm, Rectal Pus, Stench of Corpse, Suppression, and Ulcerous Phlegm, along with several one-off side projects featuring members of Ass Suck, Drop Dead, Meat Shits, and Spaz, and thought to be lost material from 80s punk proto-noisecore pioneers Sea Monkeys. New shirts, a restock of mixtapes, zines, and Deadbeat at Dawn official merchandise, as well as Trauma Team Publishing's premiere release will also be available in limited quantities. The easiest way to secure copies is by joining the mailing list by rating diseaseofthespirit@gmail.com. So then can you take me back to kind of the beginnings of the project? There were, as far as I know, quite a handful of CDR and self-released things on your, I assume Barbituarian Media was your label, right?
Yeah, more or less, just self-release, just throwing a name on it. I really didn't have much intention of it being a label, just a name to put on self-releases. But yeah, I started Hum of the Druid just about 21 years ago. I was a junior in high school, so I was about 17.
Wow.
Everything moves very quickly at that age. I look back on it and it felt like that time period lasted forever, but it's like, I was already interested in other, what, might be called underground music, metal. I was very open though. I was very, obviously stuff that had a darker slant to it. But it moved very quickly. I was so interested in just about everything, and discovered noise, and like many people, wanted to have some involvement in it, some participation. My goals weren't very big. I was just a kid, had no background in music, but I started playing around with instruments, playing around with multi-tracks. Before that, I'd spent a couple years making really wacky, goofy experimental music. It was just playing around, like not even knowing what I was doing, why. There was no intent to release it or anything. And then, around 2003, I decided I want to do something a little more serious. By that point, my taste had started to kind of metastasize into something, because before that, experimental music, what is that? You don't even know where to begin, and I didn't have anybody who could really point me in the right direction. There was a guy, I had a friend, Ryan, who was a few years older than me, who ran a college radio show that dealt with like avant-garde, experimental, a little bit of noise, but tended to be kind of on the lighter hearted side. And I was interested in that. I was just like, I want to learn about this. These are people who are doing something different. But then kind of started to develop taste in, and I use noise as kind of an umbrella for all of this stuff.
Right.
Everything from electroacoustic to, certain styles of ambient music, all that. So just developed more of an interest in that. And as my taste was developing, as I was learning more about the music, I started recording and just those initial releases, those CDRs, a couple of them came out toward the end of my senior year of high school. And, they're very humble releases, they're just what I could do at the time.
Right.
I always wanted to do something. I always wanted to carve out my own niche, do something that was distinct, something competent, whatever that meant. Because, you start out interested in this stuff. What even is competence? Is noise something where you just do anything you want? To some degree. But you start to learn a little more that while this is experimental music, you're probably not going to create something iconoclastic. There is a tradition to this. There are parameters. And when you actually start digging into it, you realize, how much has already been done, all of that stuff. So really just those early releases, just kind of learning how to like sustain certain sounds.
Yeah.
Trying to, like not have terrible like start and stop, like obvious button pushing, just learning how to do that stuff really and create an atmosphere more than anything.
Yeah. I mean, atmosphere is a big part of the project. And it's also interesting that you say that early on you were very conscious of wanting to do something kind of your own. That's not how everyone starts out. Some people start out wanting to kind of do the opposite. They want to produce something competent, but that kind of, doesn't put them out on a limb. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think most creative people,
especially at that age, I mean, that's a very young age to start, like that's a kind of an insecure age.
Oh yeah. And I was certainly insecure, about, I'm getting into a genre that as I was learning in real time, how much stuff was already out there. It's intimidating. But as far as like carving out your own niche, I mean, I think most creative people on some level, like they want to create their own little jewel, something that makes them unique.
Yeah.
Not necessarily anything revolutionary or groundbreaking, but something that sets you apart. And, I always wanted to do that, of course. I didn't know how.
Yeah.
Didn't know exactly how I was going to do that, but, that was my intent.
Tell me about meeting Pat Yankee and then working with SNSE for 3 pretty massive LPs.
I should kind of backtrack and I'll lead into the SNSE thing. But, the original kind of circle the original network that I was kind of in touch with was, I would say it was kind of the Cryonic Mind, Wormgear Zine, Scott Candy, if you're familiar with him, Grunt Splatter. He kind of, he was a very influential figure at that time. He played a big role in the formation of Tronics. He bridged this gap between noise and ambient. Of course, it's all in that darker spectrum. So early on, I'd sent stuff to him for review. I had been in touch with him. I met some people, got in contact with some people through his circle, and made contact with some other people. And then I recorded Wall of Arms, which was the first real substantial release. Through that, Gray contacted me, wanted to do the chondritic 3-inch. And then Pat contacted me sometime after that and said, I'd love to do something of yours on vinyl. I don't know if he remembers this, but he actually offered to put Wall of Arms out on LP. He said, you can either do that or if you want to do something new. And at that point, I was moving along at a quick rate. So, of course, I wanted to do something new. So that's how that came about. And, Pat, as you know him, just an absolute gentleman. He puts the artist first. Because, labels, especially in this genre, like labels can have an ego of their own, and there's nothing wrong with that. They have an identity. Labels, they curate releases. They bring artists on, and there's sort of an artistic expression on the label side in addition
Right.
to the music being released. So, but Pat, he's very much like, he let me, of course, do the art. He let me do it all,
Yep.
and just made it happen. And it was a match made in heaven for me because he always believed in keeping prices low. He's very unpretentious. So that Societal LP just came together very easily. I really don't even remember the process very much. I recorded something, had the artwork already, did a little design, and Pat just made it happen.
And you continue to work with him then for Raising the New Wing / Braided Industry and then Norse Fumigation, which I still kind of see these 3 LPs as like 3 big milestones, kind of like a trilogy, maybe if they aren't related, and they kind of represent 3 different, I think of Societal as being like early Hum of the Druid. Then Braided Industry is kind of like mid-period. I mean, of course, you're still active, and you've done, and then Norse Fumigation. You were quite quiet after that for a while.
Yep. So no, you're right. No, I mean, and those releases, having something put out on vinyl, I mean, that's a term like major is going to be pretty relative with this music. We're talking about a major release is what, 200, 300 copies. But yeah, it was on vinyl. It was, it wasn't just a CDR, because even though the Chondritic one, it's a limited CDR. It's on a label, a respected label and all that. But yeah, having something put out on vinyl was definitely a big step.
And SNSE really made an effort throughout their, existence to distribute things pretty widely. It was like kind of the opposite of the boutique style. It was like enough copies to go around, get them to distros, get them into record stores even, get them kind of as far as they can go.
Yep.
And so those records had that kind of, you can still find them probably for a reasonable price. They're not like micro editions that you have to, they're there to hear when you want to hear them.
Yeah, there was never any hype. The way he did things, and for that matter, for the way I do things, there's never any hype except for just what it is.
Right. Exactly.
This is available. This is exactly what it is. You either want it or you don't.
Long before Texas noise icon Keith Brewer dabbled in experimental music, he penned a demented fanzine dedicated to the most depraved films in history. Reanimated Miscarriage is proud to present this 9-issue compilation taken from original materials, spanning over 80 pages of crude film reviews, serial killer biographies, sick collage art, rare early work from the likes of Mike Diana, and writings on Keith's legacy and influence by Joe Romer. This and 9 old-school Noisecore reissues, new shirts, and a restock of mixtapes, zines, and Deadbeat at Dawn official merchandise will also be available in limited quantities. The easiest way to secure copies is by joining the mailing list by writing to diseaseofthespirit@gmail.com.
How did the sound or approach progress between first Societal and Braided Industry?
Changed a lot, because I mean, Societal's one, it's interesting because I'll still hear from people who love Societal, and I kind of just forgot about that as soon as it came out. It was obviously the first vinyl release, so it was a big deal for me. I mean, I never, when I started this project, I never imagined anybody would want to put it out on vinyl. I never assumed that would happen. So it was a big deal to me. But in terms of like the recordings and stuff, I'd moved past Societal. It's still one that, I don't want to say I'm not fond of it, because I think it came out fine, but it's not one of my favorites necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Raising the New Wing, I think I'd really started to settle into a different mentality. The recording process for that, I have no recollection of. I pretty much blacked out, and not substance abuse related. It was just sort of a strange blackout.
Mm-hmm.
It just happened. And when I listened back to it, I was like, don't mess with this. Because it was more minimal. I had a tendency to really work on things heavily. Like at that point, I was going home every night, just spending hours on just, a short segment of everything I was doing. Like, because I was recording the self-titled. They ended up coming out on Abisco, ended up being a cassette on Abisco.
Yep.
I started recording that before Raising the New Wing. And so I was working on that, and like everything with that was under a microscope. There's tons of layers, just heavily composed. Just I was really focusing on just every little minute. And Raising the New Wing, though, was just this very quick process. Basically, like each side was basically one session with just minimal editing, next to no post production, anything like that. And under other circumstances, I probably would have added more to it. But when I listened back to it, I was like, "Don't do that. Don't ruin this."
Yeah.
And yeah, that one was heavy duty. And I mean, that's one too where I feel like it really people heard Raising the New Wing, and I think they were like, "Okay, something's going on here."
Yeah.
There's something else going on here. And yeah, that one's more of the straight. We were talking about industrial noise. That one I think is more of just straight industrial noise.
Yeah, absolutely.
The manipulation of the acoustic sounds. I think I don't want to say I had an epiphany, but I think you can hear that I started to learn how to manipulate those in a different way.
Absolutely. And can you talk a little bit about your recording or manipulation process? Like like you've said, there's a very mechanical industrial sound to it, but it's like also very mystical and organic and obscure. What are you doing there roughly? I mean, I know you probably don't want to give away all the sauce, but
yeah, it varies. I mean, with Raising the New Wing, because I've been using contact mics like many of us do. Contact mics are an instrument in noise.
yeah.
I've been using contact mics, and you get great results out of those. But with Raising the New Wing, I remember I created just some sort of little metal structure out of some pieces of metal. I was using at least one contact mic, but then I also was using just some standard microphones. I think there were like 3 or 4 mics. And so recording different sides, different pieces of the metal. I had a device to make it all vibrate that ended up dying after that. So it's picking up like, I don't know. I don't even know how it came together, to be honest. That's one of those where I just really don't even know. It just kind of manifested itself. With that one, it was a unique situation, but in general, it's it's fairly intuitive. Just placing mics in different positions. I started to utilize less distortion, less like pedal distortion and things like that. Started to use tape distortion, analog tape distortion more. Because I was always very interested in like making acoustic sounds sound like they're cracking apart.
Right.
And, for me, like, I always wanted to do this from the beginning, but didn't really know how. But I always like it when an acoustic sound sounds almost electronic. Like you can't really tell where the acoustic sound begins and ends. The other side of that is I like it when electronic sounds almost start to sound like something organic.
Mm-hmm.
So I just try to, work with an object, work with the mic, use minimal processing, but enough processing to kind of give it a different color, different characteristic, and basically do that in a way that mutates the sound. I know it doesn't really give you anything too substantial, but that's basically what
you're
I
using
do.
like Are you using like a physical object?
Yep.
That you're playing basically.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because I mean,
using objects, and it's kind of a frenzy. Like depending on the result I'm trying to get, sometimes the sound is very violent, sometimes it's more of just like sustained and textural.
Yeah.
But my physical body, what I'm doing with my hands, what I'm doing with my body, the position I'm in, all that stuff has an impact on the result. And with Raising the New Wing, there are some moments that sound incredibly violent. They like. There'll be kind of like a grinding sound, which is the vibrating metal. Mm-hmm. But then, I'll move the metal pieces in such a way that then this violent movement cuts through. And, that really made the release what it was for me.
Yeah. Is it something you're able to replicate live?
I don't know. I stopped playing. I only played a couple of shows very early on. I mean, I would guess I would, you could do it live. I just never really experimented with it. You know, in live performance, I did use acoustic objects a couple times I played live, but not really in that specific way.
Is live something that just doesn't really appeal to you? Playing live?
I don't know. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think the idea of performing does have its appeal. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of going to shows, waiting around. I'm not really a big fan of that experience. Obviously, like live musical performance is incredible. It's just everything else that goes along with it isn't something I really like to do. Just kind of lost interest in trying that. You know, part of me wishes I would have tried it out because it's a whole different beast, and that it could have been, you know, worth doing. And who knows? You know, I wouldn't say I'll never perform live in the future. It's just not something that I wanted to focus on. I like the idea of just being in the studio. That's where I feel comfortable. That's where I feel like I can really explore ideas.
Yeah. And then tell me about Norse Fumigation, how that related to the previous LP.
Yeah, that one, you know, that one's more of, the sound is more what I would call electroacoustic. You know, I don't know that electroacoustic fans would really agree because it does have, it fits more in with industrial noise and stuff. You can hear some of the some similar tones that you hear on Norse Fumigation, other things. That one's, you know, one of my absolute favorites, you know, because I listen back, anything I listen back to, of course, I'm very critical, wish I wouldn't have done that, wish I would have done this. Norse Fumigation one, though, that to me is seamless. It just, as far as the process goes, I don't know, it just, there was more composition involved, more intent than raising the new wing, more variety of tones. You know, there's a long ambient segment on one of the tracks. It kind of has more of a surrealist sound to me as well. But beyond that, just there's glass, there's water, there's guitar, there's metals, and just all of that coalesced into what it was.
We've mentioned kind of the mystical and natural element present throughout the work, and I don't think it's a stretch to notice that there's really a lot of intent in the artwork, the track titles. What can you tell me about the content or what's behind Hum of the Druid in terms of, you know what I mean? In terms of themes or personal matter?
Yeah. It's, how I'd put it, you know, I mentioned, you know, starting the project, like wanting to do something that's distinct. And in terms of the content, because, you know, the titles, the artwork, all of that, you know, they're not sourced from anywhere else. You know, I just come up with them. And, you know, I'm attracted to things that are esoteric, but I wanted it to be, you know, my own esotericism. I didn't want to pull from other people's symbols, other people's ideas, even if the result is comparable to, you know, other esoteric subject matter in some way. You know, I wanted to use my own language, my own imagery, my own symbols, so to speak. And I don't know that there's always like some clear intent or clear theme to it. There's sort of an internal logic. And that's true for the sounds as well as everything else. It kind of relies on its own internal logic. It's kind of its own self-contained world.
I recently interviewed Ryan O'Connor from Ineffable Slime, whose project also deals really heavily with kind of occult and esoteric themes. And I'm curious about what the term esoteric means to you. Because, you know, this can mean reference to a specific religious practice, conspiracy theories, you know, it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And there's clearly a very personal thread running through all of your work.
Yeah, well,
with specific references to like specific occult imageries and ideologies, like it's also tied to some sort of like tradition.
Yeah, my approach to something like the occult is the very literal definition of the word, which is something that's hidden. it's something that is difficult to define, but you get an intuitive sense for it. It informs your perspective on, the world, what happens, how you think, but you may not have, the exact words for it. And I don't really have the words for it right now, but
Of course.
it's
That's why you make records.
yeah. What's that?
That's why you make records about it.
Yeah, exactly. That's a way to communicate it. So I don't come from an approach where like I've ever been involved in any kind of occult practice or esoteric tradition. I like that stuff, especially in music. But in doing that, just to access that stuff in my own way has always been my goal. And it's difficult for me to define, and, which might sound like a cop out. But it's, there's sort of a wholeness to everything that's there in life, but you don't necessarily know what that is. And it's where, spiritual practice comes in. It's what people spend a lot of their lives trying to come to terms with.
Yep.
And, one of the ways to do that is through creativity, in addition to something like a spiritual practice or discipline. And those are things that are both of great interest to me.
Mm-hmm. What was the reason for your pause from the project in 2010 and then returning in 2016? If I'm just correct in the timeline.
Yeah, 2010, I just sort of, there was no specific reason. I'm not somebody, I never take a deliberate hiatus.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just life was going on. I have a lot of interests. I have a lot of different things. I kind of spread myself a little bit thin. I was involved in creative stuff during that time. And, there was no deliberate pause, even and I recorded Predatory Outlook in, I think, 2013.
Okay.
I was recording between 2008 and 2010. I was recording The Conservative Road Beyond the Bizarre, which didn't end up getting released until 2019, but
Right.
that was actually recorded between 2008, 2010.
Okay.
Probably just needed a breather, something as simple as that. Just kind of needed to take space.
Yeah.
And then Predatory Outlook, it was, I don't know, it's very much about momentum, where you feel I have some momentum going, like, let me do something with that. And so Predatory Outlook, one day I just came home from work, plugged in my guitar and just hit record and did that every day for, I don't know, a week, couple weeks. I don't know how long it took.
Yeah.
But that's how that came together. But it wasn't because of any conscious decision to take a step back or anything.
Okay.
And that period, like before 2010, it was just so intense, just spending that much time with the project constantly.
Right.
Just recording and, I don't want to say practicing, but, playing around with sounds, testing things out, devoting so much time to it. And then I felt like I also accumulated a body of work that I was proud of and that I could kind of sit on as well. So I didn't feel that fire to prove anything to myself above all else, but other people as well.
Yeah. And what's the current status of the project, or what have you been up to recently, Hum of the Druid related?
Yeah, Hum of the Druid, it'll be alive as long as I am. It's just me. I still am passionate about it. I don't actively do much with it. Like I recorded about half of a full length 2 or 3 years ago, and then just kind of I've been sitting on that, thinking about it, waiting for the moment to strike when I finish it. I would like to go back to a period where I really get in there and hyper compose everything again, revisit that. But a lot of what I was doing in the 2010s was just, feeling that fire, recording what was there, and, just saying that's what that, that's it. That's the release.
Yeah.
But in terms of like, activity and stuff, I don't spend a lot of time recording or doing any of that these days. But it'll just always be active. I'm not one of these people who's going to retire or
Right.
anything like that. As long as I'm alive, the project's alive. And even if I don't do anything between now and when I'm 90 years old, I might record something then, you know?
Yeah. Is there any sort of like ritualistic or spiritual element of the recording process?
No,
You
there's
feel pretty
no,
like it's just kind of like
I put on a robe, I light some candle. No, nothing like that really. I mean, I think the whole process has a spiritual component to it, but it's unpretentious. It's not decorated in any way because
yeah.
life is all the only decoration and ritual I really need.
Yeah. You're also a visual artist. You do a lot of drawings that have been on all of the Hum of the Druid releases.
Yep.
And you know, I've seen your stuff that you've shown kind of separate from the project on your websites and things like that, the artworks. And you yourself are drawn into a lot of them, but also the same aesthetic and imagery that you see on a lot of Hum of the Druid records is also there. So I see kind of like a blending of these two planes, like the visual artwork, your personal life, and the project.
Mm-hmm.
What am I trying to ask you with this? I don't know what I'm trying to ask you with this, but I mean, these symbols, like, you know, a lot of times we see the Thor's hammer present in a lot of these in a very kind of illuminated way, and other sorts of magical symbols. Can you talk a little bit more about what you referenced in terms of the kind of the spiritual search in terms of your life outside of the music just itself?
As it relates to the artwork or in general?
Yeah, well, as it relates to your personal life, like.
Yeah, you know, I don't know, you know, it goes back, it's similar to your question about the esotericism. Like it's difficult for me to define. It's highly intuitive because, you know, the way I draw, like I start out just with.
If you'd like to continue this episode, you'll need to subscribe at patreon.com/White Centipede Noise. Once you do, you'll get access to the full version of this episode, as well as WCN TV episodes and a wide range of bonus noise content. In the full version, we go deeper into Eric's personal philosophies, his black metal projects, his long-running podcast, and much more. White Centipede Noise Podcast is made possible entirely by scene support. You can support by subscribing at patreon.com/White Centipede Noise.